all four intervening and interpenetrating postmodern life strategies have in common that they tend to render human relations fragmentary. Remember, the purity of relations reduced to single function and service, and discontinuous. They are all up in arms against string attached and long lasting consequences, and militate against the construction of lasting networks of mutual duties and obligations. They all favor and promote a distance between the individual and the other, and cast the other primarily as the object of aesthetic, not moral, evaluation, as a matter of taste, not responsibility. In the effect, they cast individual autonomy in opposition to moral as well as all the other responsibilities are remove huge areas of human interaction, even the most intimate among them, from moral judgment, a process remarkably similar in its consequences to bureaucratically promoted deaphorization. Following the moral impulse means assuming responsibility for the other, which in turn leads to an engagement with the fate of the other and commitment to her or his welfare. The disengagement and commitment avoidance favored by all four postmodern strategies as a backlash effect in the shape of the suppression of the moral impulse, as well as disavowal and denigration of moral sentiments. What has been said above may well seem jarringly at odds with the cult of impersonal intimacy, also a prominent feature of postmodern consciousness. There is no contradiction here, though. The cult is no more than psychological, illusory, and anxiety generating compensation for the loneliness and inevitably envelopes the aesthetically oriented subjects of desire, and it is moreover self-defeating as the consequence proof interpersonality reduced to pure relationships can generate little intimacy and sustains no trustworthy bridges over the sandpit of estrangement. As Christopher Lash noted a decade and a half ago, the culture of personal relations conceals a ongoing disenchantment with personal relations, just as the cult of sensuality implies a repudiation of sensuality in all but its most primitive forms. Our society has made deep and lasting friendships, love affairs, and marriages increasingly difficult to achieve. Political disablement of postmodern man and woman arises from the same source as the moral one. Aesthetic spacing, preferred by and dominant in all listed postmodern strategies, differs from other kinds of social spacing, like moral or cognitive, in that it does not choose as its points of reference and orientation the traits and qualities possessed by or ascribed to the objects of spacing, but the attributes of the spacing subject, like interest, excitement, satisfaction, or pleasure. As Jean-François Litois recently observed, the objects and the contents have become indifferent. The only question is whether they are interesting. The world turns into the pool of potentially interesting objects, and the task is to squeeze out of them as much interest as they may yield. The task and its successful accomplishment stand and fall, however, by the effort and ingenuity of the interest seeker. There is little or nothing that can be done by and about the objects themselves. Focusing on the interest-seeking subject blurs the contours of the world in which the interest is to be sought. Mad, mismad only perfunctorily in passing surface deep, the objects do not come into vision as entities in their own right, such as may need more vigor, improvement, or a different shape altogether. We do not ruminate on the way to rectify commodities displayed on the supermarket shelves. If we find them unsatisfactory, we pass them by. With our trust in the supermarket system unscathed, in the hope that products answering our interests will be found on the next shelf or in the next shop. Emancipation, says Lyotard, is no more situated as an alternative to reality, as an ideal set of conquer and force itself upon reality from outside. In consequence, the militant practice has been replaced by a decisive one that is easily assimilated by the system, since it is now assumed that the latter contains all the bits and pieces from which the emancipated self will be eventually assembled. The system has done all it possibly can. The rest is up to choose who play it, exaggerating the picture, but only slightly. One may say that in popular perception, the duty of the postmodern citizen, such like the duty of the inmates of Rabelais' Abbeys of Telemé, is to lead an enjoyable life, to treat subjects as citizens. The state is obligated to supply the facilities deemed necessary for such life, and not to give occasion to doubt that performance of the duty is feasible. This does not necessarily mean that the life of so reduced citizen must be unmitigated bliss. Discontent does arise, sometimes so acute as to prompt actions reaching beyond the ordinary preoccupation with self-care. This happens time and again, even regularly, whenever the limits of individual pursuit of the interesting are brought into relief, whenever factors evidently beyond individual control, like for instance planning decisions about a new bypass, motorway, residential developments likely to attract outsiders, closing a hospital, rationalizing a school or a college, interfere with the interest content of the environment. And yet the momentary explosions of solidarity action which may result do not alter the essential traits of postmodern relationships. Their fragmentariness and discontinuity, narrowness of focus and purpose, shallowness of contact, joint engagement come and go, and in each case, indeed, the emergent totality is not more than the sum of its parts. Besides, the diffuse grudges and grievances, as a rule spouting one-issue campaigns, do not adopt, condense, or show a propensity for reinforcing each other. On the contrary, vying with each other for the scarce resource of public attention, they divide as much as they unite. One may say that the bones of contention do not fit together to form a skeleton around which A non-fragmentary and continuous shared engagement could be rapid. Stuart Hall has Stuart Hall has pili- speedily summarized the resulting condition and the prospects it may or may not hold. We don't have alternative means by which adults can benefit from the ways in which people have released themselves from the bonds of traditionalist forms of living and thinking, and still exert responsibilities from others in a free and open way. We have we we have no notion of democratic citizenship in this sense, or perhaps we may have imagined such a notion that we cannot imagine, having no time left for exercising imagination, is a network of relationships that will accommodate and sustain such a notion. It is, in the end, the old truth all over again. Each society sets limits to the life strategies that can be imagined, and certainly to those which can be practiced. But the kind of society we live in limits such strategies as may critically and militantly question its principles, and thus open the way to new strategies at present excluded because of their non-viability. Dedicated to Judith Adler. 3. Enabling identity, biology, choice, and the new reproductive technologies. Marilyn Strathern. Whether primacy is given to social ties or biological ones, it seems that the late 20th century affords new possibilities for people who wish to be certain about how and why they are related. This is true both of legal redress, what the courts are prepared to countenance, and of technological intervention in the reproductive process. As possibilities, these instruments and techniques exist in a cultural environment of empowerment or enablement. If then one were to ask what might be new and what might be old in such pursuits of identity, one will have to consider that what is being enabled. One will also have to consider the value put on enablement itself. This chapter sketches some of the cultural paradoxes that the idea stimulates, and some of the resultant contradiction that seems to lie in what people are able to make of identity through kinship. It was with an evident sense of novelty that in 1922, first a girl and then a boy were reported in the British press to have divorced their parents. They were both exercising the power under the 1989 Children Act to take legal action on their own account, and did so from a desire to move away from their mother and to reside with their grandparents. A claim going through the Florida courts a couple of months earlier had attracted similar publicity, whereas in the British cases, the severance of the child with the child's tie with the parents lay in the assertion of legal autonomy and rejection of the parental home. The Florida 12-year-old, in the words of the New York Times, asked the court to end the parental rights of his biological mother. It was not just a question of where the boy should live, but who will be recognized as a parent. He wanted his foster parents to adopt him. The case was widely interpreted interpreted as an example of a child wanting to choose his or her parents. One might conclude from the way the issues were being presented that desire is thus realized in the exercise of choice. This will make sense of the analogy with marriage and its ongoing divorce. Yet the analogy is an odd one. Divorce is the ongoing of a choice, as the contract is usually construed, whereas the boy was contesting rights otherwise invested in what was seen as a biological type. In any exercise of choice as to the parents could only come after the severance. David Schneider, an anthropological veteran in kinship studies, sent me the New York Times report with the accompanying note. Do you think it's too late for me to divorce my mother, who has been dead about 20 years? If he found an adoptive mother, he goes on, then what happens to his son? Whose grandsons are they? Whose grandsons are they? He may have found reassurance, at least as far as his property was concerned, in the writings of a fellow American, John Beckstrom. They will reassure him that whatever his children in turn did to him, his identity will continue to be carried by them. Desire does not after all have to be subject to the vagaries of choice. It can be hardwired in. Beckstrom argued that the laws governing intestate succession should be structured to give a descendant assets to choose most able to perpetuate the individual's genes. Dreyfus and Nelkin, 1992. Succession laws are, after all, his argument when designed to reflect the wishes of the property holder. And because organisms survive in order to ensure the continuity of their specific genetic heritage, then a genes-based distribution best mirrors an individual's real desires. Here there does not even have to be mediating concept of paternity. More usually, paternal identity is regarded as crucial, as in British case when DNA fingerprinting was used to establish the inheritance claims of biological son. A High Court ruling in 1991 has already prepared the way for such DNA testing to determine paternal liability for child maintenance. I have here mixed fantasy with fact and British with American cases in order to bring out what seems contradictory appeals to choice and to genes, to what can be negotiated in the best interest of, in the divorce cases, a child, and what can be taken for granted about parents' continuity of identity in their children. Indeed, what is taken for granted is being quite variously justified. When biological connections is contested and the basis for rights, it ceases to be taken for granted, and what follows from its acknowledgement is open up to choice. At the same time, it is only the rights that follow which are at issue. The biological tie itself is not being dissolved, and it is because this tie appears indissoluble that parents can, in Beckstrom's view, super super surreptitiously perpetuate themselves through their genes regardless of the wishes of the child and regardless of whether it will in future recognize them as parents. Nonetheless, this seems rather contradictory ways of imagining relationships.